we can start with introductions. Lucy wasn't able to make our last meeting because she was teaching. So if we can go around and say our names and just our connection to the school district, and I will start. I'm Emily Figdor. And pronouns, thank you. She, her, hers. And I have two kids in Portland Public Schools, a 6th grader and a 10th grader, and I'm a school board chair.
Hi, I'm Lucy. I work as an instructor and as a GED high set lab assistant for Portland Adult Ed, teaching ESOL. I was also used to be a student at Portland Adult Ed. I'm currently working on my master's in education to become a licensed teacher, and that is where I'm at. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you, Lucy. I'm Carrie Dowdy, she, her, hers. I am the Teachers Union president currently and taught elementary school in Portland for 28 years. I say that way because I'm like, is it 28, 29?
Thank you for the reminder. Also, yeah, she, her, hers.
We'll go with it. Yeah,
beautiful. Sarah Lynn, she, hers, school board member at large.
Barbara Stoddard, she, her, hers, director of HR, or outgoing director of HR. I'm actually sitting on this as a community member. My kids went through the school system, and is that it?
Hi, I'm Barrett Wilkinson. I'm the executive director for diversity, equity, and belonging for the district. My pronouns are here, they, and I'm not a member of this committee. I'm just here for the first part. As it relates to, yes, I'm just here for the cookies and to talk about cookies, apparently. That's what you get at this point in the day. And I have also worked for us, but have a 4th grader at Kazanska.
I'm Betsy Plaskimeshi, and I work for the Multilingual Multicultural Center, and I help support the Spanish speakers in our district. And she, her, sorry.
I'm Adam Burke, they, them. I'm vice chair of the school board. I have a 4th grader and a kindergartner over at Rowe, and that's it.
I'm Melissa Burke. I'm the director of the pre-kindergarten education program here at Portland Public Schools, and I'm also a parent of 2 12th graders and a kindergartner.
Matthew Winch. I am a member of the public. I have 3 children, 2 of which are in Portland Public Schools. One's a 4th grader, Lysa, and the other's a junior at Portland High School.
Excellent. So our agenda for today is to first do the first of our trainings as we undertake this work with Barrett and Barb on our equity toolkit, equity hiring toolkit. And this is a tool that that Barrett and Barb have developed over several years, and I think they'll tell you more, but it's going to help equip us to ensure that we are addressing sources of bias and making the best decisions as we first select a search firm and then start to go through the process a few months from now of actually considering and interviewing candidates ourselves. That will be about 30 minutes. Then Adam is going to lead us in a conversation about our evaluations of the search firms and deciding on which search firm or firms to move forward in our process. And then if we have time, we are going to talk about interviewing those firms and the structure for how to do that. If not, we'll take some of that conversation to email. And so our next meeting is going to be, hopefully, assuming it can work for the firm or firms, is hopefully going to be actually interviewing those firms. So that is our work for tonight. And I think we can just get started on the equity hiring toolkit.
Great. Want me to share my screen, or do you want to do that?
I think since you're already in, that might be the easiest thing if you have rights for that.
So much.
Yeah. We should look at like how many tabs I have open. Okay. So welcome everybody. What you're going to get tonight is sort of a partial delivery of training that we have done with people across the district. We'll go through part of it tonight and then we'll come back to it a little bit later in our process. Do a little bit of framing as we do when we're talking to all of our staff to kind of ground people in what we're doing and the work we're doing. A big piece of this work is related to the Portland Promise and the idea that we're really thinking about our core values with equity at the center. And when we approach this work, we really want people to be thinking about the commitment that we've made to attracting and hiring and retaining the most talented and diverse people. And so that is the goal when you're on a hiring committee, is to really be thinking about the work that we're doing in the district. So this work has been really an evolution. We started working on the toolkit in 2017, 18-ish. We rolled it out in 2019. And we really sort of deepened and learned and evolved as we've done it. A lot of where we are now came from the Educators of Color report that we did a few years ago, and this real need to focus on not just recruitment, but retention. And particularly of our BIPOC staff, and listening to our BIPOC staff and understanding their perspective, and really getting people to intentionally think about the sort of value and the critical assets that our BIPOC staff bring to the district. Many of them have had some really negative experiences, which I would say a lot of people were not aware of or just tuned into. And so the work of the Educators of Color report just illuminated that and became a foundational document for us to use and reflect on as we're doing this work. This is really work that everybody needs to do together, and we can improve if we are focused and intentional in our actions. Really, the work that everybody does supports the people goal, because it's really about not just HR, but the culture district-wide, in departments and buildings and sort of at the ground level. And that takes everybody focusing on that work. And again, even this year, we've continued to evolve in our thinking with the addition of belonging as a focus, very different than inclusion, right? So this is in terms of where you sit in your perspective and getting people to think about community and belonging. So tonight, we're going to really focus on sort of the initial orientation that we do with the toolkit, which is around understanding bias and implicit bias and sort of thinking about that as an overlay to the hiring process. Our goal is to center equity in our hiring processes, and this really means thinking about the representation of people that we're bringing into the district to be across races, ethnicities, genders, sexual orientations, neurodiversities, abilities, all the abilities that are in the broader community that would really benefit us having in the district. We want this group, in the same way that we want our hiring committees in the district, to understand implicit bias and how we can work to really mitigate that by acknowledging that it exists as we're working through hiring processes. There are a lot of ways that in hiring that bias influences people's decision making. So staff who participate in hiring committees and hiring managers, we want them to understand the requirements, our expectations that we set. So there are requirements, and those are grounded in the equity hiring toolkit. And part of that is getting people to think about the lenses that they each hold when they're thinking about others' experiences and expertise. And really part of that is unpacking your own biases and sort of thinking about how you're viewing candidates. So just in just a minute, Barrett will walk us through different kinds of biases that emerge during the hiring process. And what we hope is that you will spend some time reflecting on your own personal biases as we go through this process, And it will help you really understand the intersection of those biases in the hiring process itself. And, you know, as we move through this process, it's about selecting the search firm. And then when we get to the candidates, right, we'll be doing sort of another round of this and thinking about, you know, how our own perspectives are going to be impacting, you know, sort of our selection. So with that, let's actually move into the bias hiring.
So, how many of you played an instrument or do play an instrument? Okay, what instrument? Me too.
Trumpet, guitar.
Trumpet, who else?
I'm
Drums.
going way back.
Yeah, yeah. What else we got? We've got almost an orchestra. We've got half of it. Okay. So just to put a little story to it to kind of get your minds around this. So in the 1950s, the top orchestras in the US were almost entirely made of men. And it's not because there weren't women musicians. In 1952, the Boston Symphony decided to start doing blind auditions. So they had performers go behind a sheet. And so they were listening to the quality of their performance to try and address this bias, but it didn't totally work. Does anyone know why?
Shoes.
It was shoes. Women often wore high heels, even though they were in a blind audition. And the implicit bias at play that didn't correct for the bias in orchestras was the sound of high heels across the stage as they went to do their audition. So just as an example of the ways in which biases can play out in the hiring process, Barb had learned about one, which was Google uploaded at some point, had a new video platform. And for what percent, it was like 12% of the population, the videos were uploading wrong. They couldn't figure out what was going on. Does anyone have a guess? It was the percent of the population that was left-handed. That's how many people were, it was uploading opposite in their platform. They've since corrected for us, I believe. Likewise, for the field of education, we have struggled to address implicit biases. So we are not even one, we're like one generation away from Brown versus Board of Education. The child at the center of Brown versus Board of Education is not yet 70. So when schools desegregated, it didn't protect educators. It was about students. So students were, you know, the focus of that. There were Black educators, there were Black administrators leading those schools, and they were not protected in that process. And so we have this setup that we are still working with today. Nationally, federal data shows that more than 8 out of 10 teachers are white, while fewer than 1 in 10 are Black. And that is, of course, in sharp contrast to national statistics, and the same is true here. We have made some great progress on that. I think for board members, you got to hear that in Barb's presentation a couple of weeks ago. And that's, you know, those are some of the things that are playing out that is bigger than Portland, certainly, right? But they are real here too. So you can go ahead, Barb, thank you. So we created the Equity Hiring Toolkit as a part of the work to try and address inequities in hiring. This is to help people really think about bias in the context of hiring and have that influence our practices. So bias in hiring is not a unique to school thing. There's all kinds of ways in which bias in hiring happens. And I actually think that in some ways, some corporations, I think, are ahead of social service and education, probably because they have money to like put research into solving some of those problems. So they do have some interesting creative solutions. And so what's in this toolkit is, you know, in line with best practices in the field, and that is ever evolving. The toolkit is really geared towards educators and the hiring of educators, but a lot of it is going to apply, I think, for this process. And, you know, especially this first part, as Barb said, like that you're thinking about a firm and how to hire that, and then also, the process of hiring a superintendent. So we'll have time to have you dig in with this a little bit. That's our goal today. So this will be a very quick primer on bias, which is just a huge field. You can go ahead, Barb. And you can click. I don't know why all those images, I must have timed them at some point, probably for some sort of emphasis. I no longer remember. But if you have a brain, you have bias. Many of our biases serve us. They say, oh, that pan looks hot. I'm not going to touch it. Or that bear looks scary. I'm not going to go near it. But some of our biases left unexamined, as I said there, are deeply problematic. So one very common bias to people who work in schools is bias about youth, right? People see a group of teenagers and they make an assumption, right? Those kids are up to something. There's many biases that are playing out in our daily lives, of course. Our brains are trying to make sense of all of those. Some of it serves us and some of it does not. Some of it is really placed there through media, through culture, through other influences. And those are the ones that are problematic because they're defining a group of people or a person based on some other definition. You can go forward, then. I think there's one before it. And this is, you had to really earn that sign. So we just talked a little bit about individual internalized bias, which influence our core beliefs, our values, and behaviors. There's institutional bias, which influences policies. Obviously, those are influenced by individual biases. It's individuals who play out these things, who create policies, all of that, but sort of in increasing impact. And then there's structural biases, which are the ones that play out across broad systems through many different policies, through many different organizational or cultural norms. And they all, those are, one circle is smaller than the others, but those are not smaller really. Like they influence each other. And, this should probably be a series of arrows or something because they contribute to each other. And sometimes the structural biases are what creates individual bias, and vice versa, and throughout all those layers. And so in hiring, some of the common types of bias, which are helpful to think about, have, a bunch of different names, which I think we'll explain in the next one, but does anyone know any of these or have a guess at one of them you want to offer?
I think the like me one.
What do you think that is in hiring?
I think it's like you're interviewing someone and they have a lot of things that you see, it's like you can relate to them. So you're instantly like, oh, I really like that person. But Absolutely. It's kind of because you kind of see a lot of you in them. So. Absolutely. Any other ones people are familiar with or heard before?
As I understand it, contrast is when you're in hiring, looking for someone with like a totally different background, different perspective than most of what you already have in your organization. The halo effect, I thought was more association with a certain group or a certain institution or a certain anything that leads you to think like, oh, this person must be the right fit for the role because of this other aspect of their being that is they're associated with, and the horn is kind of the opposite of that. A person is associated with X, Y, and Z, therefore they're not going to be a good fit because I don't like people from that group. I'm not quite up on the last two. So maybe.
Yeah, so halo is sort of in hiring is the overemphasis on one aspect someone is bringing to the table and saying like, well, they're super good at this thing, as opposed to doing a skills-based hiring, which is grounded in a rubric, which we'll get to, and looking at kind of all of the person's skills. And then Horn in opposite is not looking at the strength someone's bringing in other areas and focusing only on lack of strength or, you know, an issue, you know, kind of in a skill set, and focusing deeply around that. Contrast is comparing people to each other as opposed to a rubric, which is grounded in the skills you're seeking for the position. So contrast is really easy to fall into in hiring. Happens almost as much as the like me bias, I would guess. Leniency is really like everyone gets a satisfactory rating. And then recency is we're focusing only on their most recent skills, which you can think about in hiring can be really problematic if someone has taken a break for whatever reason from employment and we're not looking at what they've done recently. That could, you know, we could be really devaluing the skills they might bring. Or if we're only looking at the most recent job they held, the most recent skills in that, that can be an issue too. So I think the next slide explains them all. And I think I included this in the packet too, because they're just really helpful ones to, I like this. I have found this tool to be very helpful. It's been helpful to me to think about when I'm hiring manager and when I'm leading a process, like, what do I tend to do? You know, I think there's a lot in there for reflection. Another one that's not, you know, that wasn't initially included in our process and is related is the accent bias. And this explicitly came up in the Educators of Color report. And it's, you know, it's obviously related to the fit bias. They can be really intertwined because someone with an accent, there can be implicit bias or explicit bias at play. That's, you know, factoring into how someone is seeing a candidate. And it's not focusing on the fact that someone with an accent is multilingual. And we're really you know, a lot of times when that's happening, it's really negating that this person is actually bringing a whole other skill set to the table, whether or not that's, you know, explicitly something that's being sought after, that is an asset, and shows, you know, all kinds of other strengths too, that someone is multilingual. So that's another one that we've added to this to really spend time talking about. And then I think these are like, I think this is my last one, I think, which is just to remember that anytime we're in a hiring process, we're in the role as gatekeepers. It is a position of power. It is, you know, I think a responsibility then to be aware of biases, to be aware of like what's happening, and to find ways as a group, whether it's a hiring committee or, you know, something like this, that's like, you know, involving many people in the community as a hiring committee, to really think about the different roles you're bringing into this, the different expertise, and just considering the ways in which that is playing out. I mean, I think the most important thing is just to acknowledge that, you know, hiring is just such a huge place in which it's decided whether someone gets to do a thing, right? Do you have the skills to teach here, work here, lead here? And, you know, this concept is all, you know, this concept really comes from the work around understanding systemic racism, to help understand the ways in which individual systems, communities, you know, gain access for some and prevent access for others. So the tools in the toolkit are really to help think about, you know, the hiring process and to really address some of this, and to hopefully as a committee, as you get to work with each other, you'll have ways to kind of name it with each other and think about the different types of bias and say, like, you know, I think that there's some Horn effect going on where, you know, we really focused on that already. We need to go back to our rubric, or like, we need to like really focus again on the skills. But it's hard work. So I think you're all going to be going towards that way of, you know, kind of a skills-based rubric to drive towards that. And that is absolutely what we're trying to do in Portland schools. It's, you know, it's what is considered best practice at this point to address some of these biases. It is not perfect because you can still fall into all of the, you know, bias is big. and we can still fall into some of those, those challenges, throughout the process, but, that's the quick overview, that we use to help frame this. And I think I passed it back to Bart, or do I?
Yeah. This is, so, our focus has really been to shift our hiring practices in the district, looking at historic biases, and really thinking about what is best practice and moving from suggesting to requiring, which is where when we started with the toolkit, we were making suggestions. And as we've moved along and brought people along in the process, we're now saying this is the expectation. We have moved from the traditional question and answer to a much more robust process, which we will talk about, because it's not just about people being articulate, right? We really care about skills and experiences and thinking about how people match against the competencies that we're seeking. And again, this is about competency-based hiring. So what we're going to do is just a quick activity. We will break into a couple of groups and we'll look at a handful of stages of the hiring process and have people think about what are the sort of blocks that you hit and opportunities at that point in the hiring process, as it relates to really the overall sort of how bias might impact it. And so what we'll do is, back to the activity itself. So what we have here we've just broken the stages of hiring into 6 different steps. We can do the first one together so you can get a sense of what the conversation is. And then what I've done is broken us into 3 groups of 4. And then each of those groups will get assigned, number 2, number 3, number 4. We'll just do a couple of them so you can have a chance to talk in a small group. And then we'll come back together and share out. So when you think about preparing to post a position, right? So this is sort of the first step. I need to hire somebody. When you think about that, what are some ways that bias might play out at that step in the process? People have some ideas about that. So what are the things you need to post a position, right?
Job description.
Yep.
Salary band.
Yep. And so when you think about that, what are ways that there may be bias as inherent in that piece of the process?
First thought is you're building a narrative based on the person you're replacing.
Yep.
Positively or negatively, based on that experience.
Yep.
You could include things that in the job description that aren't 100% necessary, which could end up inadvertently excluding people with certain disabilities.
Yes, exactly.
Or kind of like thinking about like educational requirements, like including things that historically marginalized folks have less access to, sets up the process for a skewed pool. So thinking about, could it be lived experience versus a certain degree?
And in the district, we have moved from a lot of times saying now preferred versus required. We're saying that experience might be substituted for certain required educational requirements and things like that. So that's exactly right.
And Barbara, I want to add also, I think the language then we use on the posting, I think the narrative sometimes the narrative has a lot of bias because you just focus on the people, then you want them to understand your language. So that means the complexity of the language has a bias on the posting as well.
Yes, that's exactly right. What we would call jargon,
Okay.
right? Education jargon and certain terms we can use that are really industry specific, and a lot of people might not even know what they are.
Yeah, that's true.
Any last comments? And then we'll actually just break into this activity. So what we'll do is, because there are some people online, what I'm going to do is put Adam in a group with people who are online, so you guys can sit at the computer and talk. And I don't know if it'll be really distracting to have the owl on. So Alyssa, why don't you can stick with Adam and Mickey and Joseph, And then Emily, Nicolette, Carrie, and Betsy, you guys are going to be in a group. And then Sarah and Lucy and Matthew. And so we can just scooch around the table. And what we'll do is, Adam, why don't you guys take box 2, which is posting and recruitment. And Emily's group will do box 3. And then Sarah's group will do box 4. And we'll just take like 5 to 7 minutes to just have a conversation.
Sounds pretty good about it.
I see, as you've got your group there. Let's see if I can. I don't know why, well, because figuring mine.
Well, I just moved it off of that screen.
Oh, I see. Sorry, as you guys are talking. We don't have this in here, do we? Or do we?
Yeah. Just leave it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, just right down here. So group 2 has posting and recruitment. Group 3 has resume review and interviewee selection. Group 4 is building the hiring committee, which you've all already done. Joining us. Got it. Okay.
Start sharing the screen for a minute, Barb.
Sure. I'm a little forgetful.
Shall we stop?
Posting and recruiter. So then posting.
Hey, everybody.
Starting to recruit for what are potential sources of bias.
Yeah. Potential sources of bias.
Where are you?
Yes.
Joseph and Nikki, can you hear? Okay.
Oh, yeah, perfect. Can you hear?
Yeah, okay. So right now, we're
Oh, sure. So we got assigned number 2, which is posting and recruitment, to talk about any bias related to that.
yeah, so our test is just talk about how bias might show up in posting and recruitment in that portion of the process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
What are yours?
Any initial thoughts? Okay, yeah. Any initial thoughts on how bias shows up in posting and recruitment?
All right. Can you hear me now? I was muted.
Yeah.
So what I see most of the time is the first impression. Then, on the recruitment, people try to go have a bias on the first impression. I mean, the way you just see the person. I mean, I can say the like me bias can play also a role on the recruitment, because you see that person, you already had an assumption. You like that person, or you don't like that person. I mean, the first impression is one of the most biased. Then people have, even though before to listen to that person, you can just look at the first impression and building a bias around the recruitment.
Yeah. No, the first thing that comes to mind for me is just the where you do those things and where you don't do them, right? Like, where do you post it? Where do you do outreach for recruitment? And where don't you?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I think like in the case of like the state of Maine, it's more networking. So like most jobs or most job applications, like networking, like, hey, I have somebody who might fit this description for this specific job, and it does have some benefits in certain contexts, but for the most part, like it's mostly about trying to figure out who's being networked and who has access to these networks. And so, yeah, you find that and like, for example, like just here in the state, most jobs, and I've noticed that like you can get access to whatever opportunity you want to, but you just need to be or you just need to have that network, right? And it's about who has access to this network. So for example, if you know if you know someone on the school board, chances are like you're gonna get like some opportunity around that if you wanted to do something like that. But if you don't have that access, those chances are very, very less likely.
Yeah, that's true. And I think also is that exactly where, what kind of social media are you using? What kind of platform of social media are you using for posting? Sometimes, you go to Indeed. It's not a lot of people going searching Indeed. I mean, it's really a bias. Then you know that that's going to be a target of population or target of candidates who know about Indeed, going to go over there and posting those kind of application. But knowing is really underqualifying a specific target of population, then they know you're assuming that they never know about Indeed and just go looking for those postings. I mean, the bias on why we posting those recruitment and application is a key major. Are people searching for a job?
Yeah, I think about that with our communications, and like we're on Instagram or Facebook, but like, are we on WhatsApp and platforms like that too?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think there was this program that needed volunteers, right? And they had the application on like there was this poster, right? And they had a QR code on that, and like that poster was on Facebook, right? So from Facebook, I actually went directly to the application. So I could have been scrolling on Facebook, right? And saw that and just hopped on the QR code and just like immediately got onto the application. Something that I probably wouldn't have happened if it wasn't like on a Facebook platform and stuff like that. So again, it circles back to the conversation of access, who has access, it's mostly who has access, who do you want to have access? And from those like questions, you could actually see how certain people could get the application and stuff like that.
I think we thoroughly wrote that chapter.
That quick, right?
Yeah.
All right, folks, why don't you wrap up your last sentence and then we'll come back together.
And then put us back to the full room.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so can I they were meeting on that. Okay. So, group 2, what ideas did you guys come up with?
Group 2, does someone want to report out for us?
No, I think that's for half the time, so.
Joseph, you want to report out?
Box number 2. Number 1, box number 2.
Oh, this is us?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Joseph, do you want to report out?
Oh, yeah. Joseph, and then I can add. Go ahead, Joseph.
Right. So for our team, we had posting and recruitment. And one of the things that came up for us in the beginning was basically it was more so language, right? And where are you posting the application? So Miss Bondo mentioned Indeed how there's some people that may not know what Indeed is, or there's some people that don't use social media or have pretty basic social media platforms such as Facebook and won't have access to these applications. And most of the stuff that we're talking about was centered around who has access to applications, who has access to networks or of like community networks that you could have the ability to apply for a job. So if you know the superintendent, the previous superintendent, like there's chances are you could get a job at the superintendent's office. And so who has this network? So who has access? And answering those questions are kind of lead us to discovering whether there's bias in how we recruit people and how we post stuff like that. I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that.
I think you have covered almost everything. So I mean, if I just want to emphasize is exactly, so I mean, the key bias is exactly who you want to target, what kind of population you really want to send a message and to send a posting. So I mean, to access some of the networking, to access the social media. So that's really a key bias. Then those are some of the population, they may never go into search those kind of places. So this is something that I can add. And also is that you have a specific already idea about what kind of candidate you want. So you know exactly where you're going to find it. And those are the places then you're going to, try to reach out and posting your application search for the recruitment.
Great, thank you. Anybody else on the team want to comment, or anybody else in the room on box number 2? All right, did you guys do box number 3? You did too.
We did too. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Clearly did not follow instructions.
That's fine. So as a group, let's just look very quickly at number 3 when we're doing the resume review and thinking about the interviewee selection. Do people have any ideas on that one? Thank you.
Halo and Horn, big time. Like what schools they went to, how you perceive their name, what ethnicity their name is.
Also, if you know them, that adds all sorts of biases.
Mm-hmm. Just the kind of graphical organization of a resume. I've heard wildly conflicting information from people who have experience in hiring about what like the format of a resume should look like, and that can also differ from culture to culture and country to country. So just if someone sends in a resume, it doesn't look like you expect it to look, that could be a form of bias just against the whole candidate.
Absolutely. Even just fonts.
I can add something. And I think when you look at the name, I think the name on that person on the resume, that's really the first key. Is really as soon you see that that's a person, then you have a bias on that. So you already have the first impression to minimize the resume itself. So you just get focused. Okay, sometimes you just don't pay attention on the format because the name is already disqualified that person in the first place.
Yes, there are some applicant tracking systems that allow you to blind select, so you can hide the names.
Oh, okay.
Ours does not do that, but it is out there. And it's true that in the same way that an address or a zip code can often be telltale for certain things, that names, and then as we get into the wording and the structure and people whose first language might not be English in terms of, grammatical errors and things like that, which I would say it's been interesting for us because we have really thought much more deeply about that. I mean, for me in my role, that things that used to stand out to me as problematic I've completely wiped away. Okay, how about box 4?
That was us. I'm happy to read my list and then you can fill in anything I missed.
That sounds good.
Beautiful. So with building a hiring committee, filling it with people that you know, in like the actual evaluation of those folks, the opportunity is blinding the names or other identifying factors, filling it with only like decision makers or people that have assumed value or power. There's a potential for digital bias. So if you're only advertising digitally, or you can only submit to be on the committee digitally. and another piece of that is who sees the posting or who is asked to be on the committee. We can leave a lot of people out. An opportunity for a hiring committee, if there's compensation for folks who may have to give up wages to be part of the committee. Thinking about the timing of the meetings could be exclusionary or inclusionary, depending on that. I think that's all I had. Was there anything else I missed?
Just I mentioned that like any bias, you kind of fall down a rabbit hole of bias that may have applied, to the hiring of the people already in the organization who make up the hiring committee.
I do think there's more opportunity for bias when you build the hiring committee after you review resumes. Just because when you review resumes, you sort of already have some assumptions, and I think that you can then easily build that into people who would confirm those same assumptions on the hiring committee.
Yeah, I also would like to underline that upper management bias, so to speak, when lots of weight is given to, the upper level decision makers rather than those who would be interacting with the new hire on a day-to-day basis.
Other comments? Yeah, so I think that for us, we have thought a lot about the hiring committees and the structure of hiring committees and who is sitting at the table and making sure that there is diverse representation. The hiring manager, we ask the hiring manager to really think about the power structures that exist, because even if you have people sitting at the table, if they don't feel safe to speak up, then it's really defeating the purpose of having the diversity on the committee itself. And that's part of the reason we really try to get people to think about this during the training. Then 5 and 6, we'll probably dig deeper when we come back to this later. So I'm going to not spend time talking about the specific interview process and sort of the decision-making process, because we'll come back to that. And again, when we have our next session, we'll really get more deeply into the hiring process. And so these are things that we require now in terms of having a committee. So no one person should be doing hiring. We don't want hiring in a vacuum. There should be some representation there. We now want multiple measures. And so this is really that move away from just the Q&A interview and bringing in performance tasks of some sort that really look at the competencies. So you're making a skills-based decision versus just how articulate somebody is in answering questions. These are things for teachers, a role play, a lesson plan, maybe a video of them teaching a lesson. For positions in district office, we almost always have some kind of a written, like write a memo or some kind of communication. So those kinds of things are what we use.
Just out of curiosity, when was that implemented?
When?
Yeah.
So this is really started from when we rolled out the toolkit in 2019. I would say that it's been implemented with not perfect fidelity.
Yeah.
So we've been auditing the process, and really, as I said, we've moved from suggesting really to requiring. And so it's every hiring season, we are sort of getting more and more focused and narrowing in on this.
Nice question. Sorry. I'm wondering if this specifies the difference between regular bias and implicit bias. And also, does it also talk about discrimination in hiring? Because that could be different from just regular bias.
So I'm not sure about the answer to the first question. I don't know if you want to address that. I'm not sure in terms of.
I've got to think about the second one. Sorry, what was the
Implicit bias is like racial-based bias, where regular bias can just be like, you have a bias about, you don't like the same TV show, or like, right, you didn't grow up in the same place, where implicit bias is specifically towards racial stereotypes and like being specifically biased about somebody's like race or stereotypical, or like that's the difference between the two. And then discrimination is obviously you have to have it in hiring because somebody can, or like it's against the law. Or I mean, I guess that's what Campbell, sorry, I don't know, my voice is jittering. But I think that's what Campbell discussed, but I'm assuming it has to also be in the hiring
Absolutely.
process.
I mean, our approach is that when we have people sign our confidentiality agreements and sort of understanding that there are questions that we can't ask right from a legal perspective versus something that's much more nuanced, is really the bias that comes into play.
Okay.
But yes, absolutely. I mean, we have equal opportunity, affirmative
Yeah,
action, like those sorts of
yeah.
things as
Yeah.
part of the process.
I think it might be poignant or important to like make the difference between implicit and regular bias, because anybody can just have a bias of like not liking a color, or like there's regular and then there's like intentional, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Or like bias that is unconsciously racist, but you haven't like gone through the process to like undo that or whatever. It's like makes sense.
If like you could be biased, like implicit bias, like even if you don't even realize it consciously.
Yeah, it's like unconscious. But I just wanted to make that point, I guess. Maybe it's something you guys can look into, but
I think it focuses more on the latter, less on sort of the, like, what could be more surface level bias.
Mhm.
It definitely focuses more on the like equity lens of bias.
that aspect of
And certainly the training that, this is the training we're trying to get everyone to really be doing as part of the process. And that, that's what we're driving towards.
yeah.
But, yeah, definitely get what you're saying about that.
Well, and the last piece is really the development of rubrics. We've been working on these for a long time, and we are constantly tweaking and updating them. I would say that one of the things that we talk about and that we want people to be thinking about is this idea of scoring, because once you attach a number to something that's subjective, people end up getting really focused on the numbers versus actually a more holistic view of the candidate. And so we all do it, and then you start to look at the ratings. I was doing it when I was looking at the proposals from the vendors, right? Like, oh, I scored this one this way. I'm looking at the numbers versus trying to step back and look more holistically at the process. And so again, we spent quite a bit of time looking at the rubrics and thinking about rubrics.
So we are working on a magazine version of this toolkit. But I printed just like the first section, just for reference, from this conversation. And there's a lot more to this, but, just wanted you to have basically some of the summary from the slides, and certainly we can share the slides with you too. And I know, from those of you that I do know, I know many of you bring a ton of experience and perspective and expertise to this that, only contributes positively to hiring towards equity, but and you'll have Barb as the in-house resource. But it was a pleasure to get to hang with you as you embark on this very important work.
Awesome. Thank you, Myron.
Thank you, Ben.
And thank you, Barb. And we will do more of this as we move forward in the process. So really appreciate this as a first step. And with that, I'm going to hand it right to Adam to move into the conversation about evaluating the search firm proposals.
Cool. Thanks again, Vera. So we have about 25 minutes, and the goal of this portion will be to determine which firms we're going to ask to interview with us. And so just an overview of my process is I'd like to just show you an overview of where the scores landed. I'd like to give you the opportunity if anybody wants to share things that stood out to you while you were reviewing proposals, particularly perhaps at a thematic level, at the whole of the group of proposals. Then I'd like to do a straw poll, just to see if we can move forward, or basically like a what's it called? Unanimous consent, or in the sense of if nobody disagrees with my proposal, then we'll just move forward that way. Then do a straw poll, then get in deeper into the details, and then try to come out with where we're going to be. So it sounds a little complicated, but I think it'll seem fluid once we're into it. All right. So just give you a sense of things. So let me navigate here. Can't see that well. I'll bring this back over. All right, so Mickey and Joseph, do you see the spreadsheet?
No.
No, you don't?
I do, but it's really small.
Oh, let me try again. That's the wrong. Okay. Let me bring you back.
Zoom in.
Bring this. I'm gonna zoom this.
Well done.
Okay, and then come back over here. And this should be it. How about now?
Perfect.
All right, perfect is where we want to be. So here you can see this is totals of everybody's scores per column per firm. You can see a total score and then what the average score, which would look more like it did on your individual spreadsheet. So just have a sense, Barb, you flagged for me where our chance for error is in this, because I don't know what that looks like based on what you're just seeing on rubrics. But as you can see, there's one firm that stands alone in terms of its score, Alma Advisory. And then there's some others that stand kind of closest to each other, and then some that don't at all. So just to take the mystery out of the room, that's where the scores landed. And now I'd like to give a chance if anybody would like to speak to their experience of reviewing the proposals and anything that stood out to them. Again, kind of thematically, that might give some voice to what we're seeing here in the numbers. I welcome that. Please, Alyssa.
I just wanted to say that as I went through this, I felt like the rubric was kind of surfacing the same competency repeatedly, and that there maybe were additional competencies that we hadn't really considered in terms of the construction of the rubric that I didn't think about until I was reading the proposal and was like, oh, I understand more about this process now, and I have some questions about what's most important. Yeah.
I do agree with that. I felt obviously, equity is rightly a central point of the hiring process. But I feel 4 of the categories of the rubric were kind of speaking to that. And the last one, the understanding of the board's desire to cultivate candidates within Portland Public Schools, all the search firms were basically like, yeah, no, we don't do like that.
Well, and I mentioned this at the first meeting a couple weeks ago, and sort of noted it in my reviews that everyone that, on the column of clear understanding of the board's desire to cultivate candidates from within, it goes back to my original question, what are the qualifications of the candidate that we're looking to hire? Because in my head, I say to myself, how many of the internal candidates actually have the qualifications? I don't know what the qualifications are, so it's hard to answer. So it must have been hard for a search firm to address that as well. So it was more a struggle of sort of trying to tear apart their response. And my review came down similar to the scores there, that Alma was the highest, and they struck me as also the ones that read into the proposal the most, and tried to do the best job of responding to all categories. And but we're still weak in that center column as well, because I think that was a tricky item for them to address, anyone to address.
And they did have Alma did kind of have they did talk about it. And they did make the valid point that hey, cultivating an internal candidate for the position of superintendent isn't something that you can just turn around and say, but what about this person? It has to be a long game. And part of what they were discussing was we can provide training on how to get that infrastructure into place, over the long term.
And I agree with them. That's why I said partial evidence, because they partially, and this is more feedback from me to the board, is that if it is important to the board in the future, something I'm working on with a nonprofit right now is succession planning and building candidates from within to make sure that you're able to hire from within. And so I would actually suggest you make that a part of your next superintendent's job description.
I think we don't need to get stuck on this, but I think all that we were intending was to say that internal candidates get considered, because the manner of these search firms is a lot of them are looking to place their own people. So we just want to make sure that they're is a structure and support and intention around considering people within Portland Public Schools. We don't need to, like, we will get to the process of building that profile, and that's part of our work together. I guess
I wasn't aware of any of that.
we did, yeah, we talked about that at our first meeting, and I'm sorry you weren't there.
I see.
But yeah, that's the nature of these firms, is that they want to place their own people.
Yeah, that was apparent from their talk about their networks and their process of reaching out to solicit personal and professional recommendations from their associates. That was evident, but I was not aware.
But it still goes back to my original comment. If you don't know what the expectations are, their network could include somebody in Portland Public Schools, but not at a superintendent level in their view. You don't know that, because these firms are suggesting they have a wide network that would potentially suggest that they've been in touch with somebody in Portland Public Schools. You wouldn't, that's not inherently known. But again, the qualifications that you have set are going to really define that, in my view. So
Whether it's even possible.
Whether it's even possible that you're going to cultivate bring somebody that hasn't been cultivated within your organization. Right.
I think the question matters most in terms of, like, some of them were saying that they would vet candidates before presenting them, and others were not, right? There were different points in the process where the firm would involve the search committee. So I think just having a clear expectation from us about what that point of the process is and what we expect in terms of internal candidates could probably alleviate that. Like, maybe internal candidates are automatically interviewed in keeping with policies elsewhere in the organization. I don't know, but
Yeah, I was hoping to see something in there that was just a one bullet point of the ways in which they would cultivate local candidates. And really I saw some of our language dropped in, but that was pretty much it. And I get it. They basically, their work is to look at national candidates. I mean, that's what the firms do. And so it was just an interesting note that it was very clear in the proposal that was something that was important, that almost nobody picked up on as something, to put a thread in there.
It strikes me that the inclusion of, like, a local candidate kind of runs counter to most of these search firms' interest, because, like, they assume that we're paying them $25,000 to run a search, not to present them someone who's already on our doorstep. And they, figure, like, hey, no, take this guy. He's you would never have found him without us, which is probably why they don't really want to highlight the fact that we're promising candidates within our own sphere as much.
I mean, I think it's, I just think it's difficult. I mean, like, that's something we have to take into account. They're in different states. They operate within different school districts. Like, I don't think we can expect them to understand Portland to the point of, like, coming here and picking somebody and being like, this is what we know about Portland, and this is how we know to, like, understand the ways in which, like, a person in Portland can serve the school district. I think it's, like, a lot to expect, especially a capitalistic firm that is trying to obviously get their needs met as well. I think we can leave these questions or the ways we would like them to prioritize that in the interview process, like, because that's before they have a pool or before they go and look for candidates. We can specify that we want that, or we want you to do more, or create more resources and capacity to find, or to bring us at least one or two local candidates, or, like, consider. And then also, even, how are you going to do that? But I think it's hard to expect them to do that now when they don't know or understand our city.
You're going to say the same thing I am. Go ahead.
Well, I just think that's perhaps the point but I'm just conscious of time to button up the internal candidate portion, is that there's some clarification that needs to happen in terms of course, what the profile of the superintendent is going to be, but also how a search firm is going to engage internally, presenting that profile, right? To your point, Matthew, and to your point that we need to bring that forward as an interview question. And I feel like that's loud and clear. And I just want to try to give that a place and allow us to talk about anything else that might have come up for folks while we're talking about the whole, and then start sorting through this. But if that's not what you're saying,
good.
okay.
Does the board already have internal candidates in mind?
The board does not.
We are the search committee. The board is not we're the ones who will make a recommendation to the board. So the board doesn't have capacity to bring a candidate forward. We were the search committee. That's our work.
It was solely placed in there for two reasons. One, as Emily said, that often search firms don't pay attention, and that is part of the process because they want to say our recruiter found a person. And second, our feeling is that this is not a moment in time when we necessarily need somebody from outside the district to kind of start over, that there's momentum happening with the Portland Promise, and there could be an internal candidate that has potential that obviously is not the superintendent now. It may not have been a superintendent, but could be. And so we just wanted to send a signal that we would like that to be inclusive in the process, not only look nationally. That's kind of the origination there.
A signal
to the search firm.
To the search firms, so that
Yeah. Just so they get a sense of where we felt we are in this moment in time.
I think the broader issue that this raised for me in thinking about the rubric was just about the level of specificity of process we're looking for, because what became clear to me reading through these is that some of these firms had much more set processes than others. And so that's the piece about the rubric that I think, I don't think addressed as much as I now think it needs to, having read all of the proposals. And so I just wasn't sure that we had given much consideration to, like, are we looking for very specific things to be able to assert that we want to have happen in this process? Just in terms of the content or the order or how specific things are, because some of them seemed like they were more rigidly structured than others. And some of them even seemed to me to lack structure. So I would sort of like to throw that out for conversation, because it seemed like.
I also felt like that. It felt like some would just like steamroll us and just run their process. And then we'd have candidates at the end to look at, whereas others felt like there were more entry points to, and from the searches that I have been a part of, the more entry points feels like a better process, because they get to know your culture and your people a lot more than just coming in and doing a process. So I also felt that was missing from the rubric and is super important.
That's why I found it a little bit of a turnoff when they would talk about like the broadness of their network and their web of associates. And I'm like, yeah, I felt like that was exactly the opposite of what we were looking for, which is why another reason I rated the Alma Advisory Group as high as I did. They're a much smaller firm than any of the others. And it seems like we do have a lot more entry points within that process. And they're fewer clients, more attention to our needs and our search.
I agree with that.
Oh, so I might just use that as a signal that we can start talking more specifically, unless there's anything else at a trend level that somebody noticed while they were going through, they'd like to put out there before we.
I just like the one that the proposal that got our name wrong. I thought that was very promising.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say is that so I was totally thinking along the way you were thinking, and I was in terms of like the ones that seemed more rigid and set. And I was also struggling at the same time, because a lot of those firms have a ton of experience, right? So they know the process, they have these networks, and so I was just struggling with trying to balance, like, do we want somebody that has a ton of experience and really knows what they're doing versus so maybe a younger firm, not as big of a firm that may be more attentive to us, so I was just struggling with that balance, because this didn't really talk about like how many years experience they have or how many superintendent searches have they done, that kind of thing.
Well, it's deliberative versus prescriptive. Alma is definitely the boutique firm. They're also the firm I related to in the sense of their fee, because they were the highest. Wasn't a turnoff to me, because their fee was actually where I expected it to be based on what I've done in the past. A 1/3 fee.
The other ones will get there with all the add-ons.
And there was some indications of that in other places, but it also leaves the door open that they're actually going to pay more attention to us, because they're proposing more time being invested in this process. Whereas the firm at $10,000, you probably are going to get steamrolled.
There was a firm at $10,000.
$10,500, yes.
But it was, and just to be explicit about why we didn't include, and I appreciate the feedback on the rubric was really good. No. it was, I mean, this is all of ours, so no criticism taken. I mean, this is our work together. But just to, money explicitly was left off of the rubric because in part what Matthew was saying, we're going to pay for this. We have a board contingency fund and we have enough money to pay for all of these. I mean, we to cover whichever one we choose, and we wanted to not have to make a decision based on money.
Just out of curiosity, what would that money be spent on if it wasn't spent on a search firm?
It usually just sits in the account
Interesting.
because it's a contingency account.
Yeah. But
So I just want to kind of make a motion that we transition here. Is anybody okay with moving on? Okay. So my proposal is that based on the scoring that we're looking at here, and it happens to be in kind of order from top to bottom, the three firms at the bottom have the three lowest scores. So my proposal is anybody not okay with just eliminating them from our consideration as we start to talk about interviewing?
maybe we could roast them for a few minutes.
No, I don't want to do that.
I'm being recorded.
1 to 5 meeting, thumbs up.
I think age-wise, I was gonna talk about, I think they had a network that I really appreciated. So I would like for them to stay on there, because I mean,
Okay.
I don't know. I think network is important because Portland Public Schools doesn't have access to a lot of the demographics that we want.
Can I share some of my specific critique of HYA?
Oh, no, not yet. So this was just to see if I could shorten the stack a little bit. So you're not okay with moving forward 3, you like to keep HYA. So now the proposal would be, are we okay with eliminating the 2 bottom ones and moving forward with only talking about those top 4?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mickey and Joseph, are you okay with that? Talking about only the top 4 here, Alma, BWP, and capital HYA? Yeah, okay, cool.
And I would like to look to see which the name is of one I have in mind before saying that, but.
Okay, while you look, the exercise I'd like to try is a quick go around just to get a sense of where y'all are at. If it was only up to you, how many firms would you interview? And I just would like to hear a number. Like, would you want to interview 2? Would you want to interview 3?
Clarification. How many would we interview based on these scores, or how many would we interview if we had just for time purposes?
It could be a number of criteria. It could be because you just feel like that would be a good process if we interviewed an X number of firms. It might be because you know that you feel torn across 3 firms or 2 firms. But I'm not asking for the justification. I just want to get a sense of perhaps what number of interview slots we're trying to drive to in our process in the next 15 minutes. Does that sound good? 3, 2 and 2, and Mickey and Joseph, how many
I will go with
firms
2.
would you interview?
Mickey was at 2.
Mickey was at 2, and Joseph?
2.5. I'm kidding.
2.5, okay. All right. That just gives me a sense of where we are.
Fine, Adam, thanks.
Oh, in terms of the firm names, okay. All right, so let's talk about HYA first, because they seem to be the outlier compared to that.
Could I ask one clarifying question first?
Yeah.
Just if we interview a firm and we say we'd like to work with you, can the firm say no?
Yep.
Okay, so I just then I stick with my 3. Great.
Okay.
Can I share some of my specific critique on HYA?
Well, yes, and so my proposal is whomever would like to champion someone to go into an interview, I'd like them to speak first, and then we can critique them. So Nyla, would you like to say more about HYA and their network?
Yes, I like their network of diverse folks, because I just feel like we're in a very complex space, and we need somebody to think beyond the spectrum of where we are now. And I feel like within the school districts that they've worked with, being kind of specifically diverse folks, I feel like they would have the capacity to get us somebody that could address some of our needs. And for me, it was definitely mostly their network. Yeah.
Okay. Counterpoint.
Counterpoint. Their proposal, the HYA, was struck me as like really generic. They only used our name 3 times compared to, the 12, the 15, the 23 from some of the other districts, which kind of ties into what you said earlier about, we're handing off the search to a capitalistic firm in name of.
And they all are.
Yeah, they all, no, for sure. They all are, but like, they're kind of looking for clients. I did see that kind of impressive list of school districts, but I'm not sure how much weight, like the demographics of the school districts necessarily carries. Their discussion of diversity and equity kind of seemed a little lip servicey to me. I didn't make more specific notes because I didn't really want to write a novel here on that. But that was some of kind of my impressions of them.
I will speak up because they are not, of the remaining 4, they are not my lowest ranked. One of the firms that's above it that we'll get to in a minute, I have ranked much lower than them. So obviously my review supports them more as a top 3 group. But I will say my 4 notes were the 2 important ones to me are overall, they seem like a top-notch firm, but they really didn't seem as though they read the RFP.
Yeah.
That was one of my comments. And then under the clear understanding of equity as a core mission of Portland Public Schools, I noted that they tout their work in this sphere, but they really do not acknowledge Portland Public Schools' work in their DEI efforts, which again ties back to, did they thoroughly read the RFP? But again, I have them higher than others.
Emily?
From my perspective, I think if we go with a big firm like this, they have a lot of Northeast clients. They've worked extensive there. I think there might be, so they have they've worked extensively in the Northeast. And on the flip side, and so it's a big firm with reach and experience. On the flip side, I think the project team that would be assigned to us was all white.
Yep.
So
I noticed that too.
it's 2 reflections.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to say about HYA?
They said that one of their emeritus associates left them to found the I forget the acronym, NABSE. I know that the B is Black and the E is educators, which doesn't really strike confidence. Like they didn't do that while they were an associate, that wasn't something that HYA did. And they're part about, that they haven't seen any evidence that other firms are as good as them. Gave me the impression like they're not particularly well informed about the marketplace, possibly, deliberately. And that sort of speaks more to like, yeah, we have our network and we don't look very outside of it, which was not really line up with the rubric for me.
I didn't see them address the guarantee at all either. A guarantee of superintendent doesn't stay for a year, or if we don't find a candidate, which we did see in some of the other ones. So that to me was also something that I had hoped that each of them would have had.
I didn't look very closely at that section because it wasn't in there.
Mickey and Joseph, do you have anything you'd like to say about HYA?
Yeah. Okay. For me, I was not really too much impressed because I feel like it's about just getting a business, then really going to the value of what we are looking for as a Portland Promise and to our goals, and also want to look at the consultant and everything is just white people, is nothing a lot of diversity there. So I was not really quite impressed.
Okay. Joseph?
I have similar sentiments with most of the group. The application was really not that, there was no effort into it. I think it was even one of the applications that had the least it was like had like very little to do with like there was no like I couldn't see. So you see how like the different applications were someone incorporated the language that was in the RPF and our stuff like that, and like it was lacking in their application. But at the same time, it's not top four, so it won't really affect me if they're there or not.
Okay. So, and then there's no unanimity that I've heard in the conversation, so I'm just gonna pause on that. I'm gonna flip us up to Alma Advisory, which clearly is the top scorer, and just ask, does anybody not agree with moving Alma forward to an interview? So we have no dissent on that. Okay, so thumbs up. Okay, so we'll move Alma forward to an interview so we can feel some forward momentum in this too. Maybe it's just for me, but here we go. So then if we drop back down to the second lowest score of the four that we're looking at is BWP. Would anybody like to champion BWP? Yes, please, Emily.
So BWP led our last search, and the project leader for the last search would be the project leader Deborah on this search. She's a Black woman, and she would be our main contact. And they found us Javier. So
Mic drop.
I don't know. That to me is really something.
Yeah, mic drop. Mic drop.
And I remember the other finalist in the pool too. And I was just a community member, but I went to an event with her and I was super impressed with her as well. She was a woman of color. And so that's really significant to me. And then also, they have a really good track record with superintendents staying on in the job. Mm-hmm. And that is a core challenge for us. Like, we don't want to just go through this and go through it again. Javier being here 7 years has been such a change from what we were, from our experience previous to that. So those were the things that made me think, oh yeah, we should at least interview them.
Yeah, I'd actually like to second that too. I think that like for me, I would like place them over Alma. The only thing was that like their applications seemed like, you know, when you know that you like want something and like you're applying for the competition and it's like the first round, and so like you don't try until like the semifinals or finals. So that was kind of the vibe from the application. That's why I didn't score them as higher. But in terms of like their ability to actually find a good superintendent was like really exceptional. And I actually like the fact that they offered 1 year mentorship for superintendents. And so that made me instantly think about like, oh, you could have someone from the state of Maine that doesn't have as much experience but could get mentored for a year, you know, and there's that support system that they bring. And also the fact that like they got us Javier, so
right. And please.
I like that they pay to join other networking groups. I think that's
How do you mean
investment. They pay to join different associations so that they can. What's that what it is?
What sort of associate? I'm sorry, I'm not following.
Oh my God.
They hold membership.
Yeah, I misread that. I thought they were, never mind. Sorry. Disregard that.
Okay. Sure.
Does anybody have points they'd like to speak to against BWP?
So I'll speak up. They're the ones that I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
I rated them. They're actually rated lowest for me. When I read through their proposal, I didn't realize that they were the firm that brought us Javier until I was done reading it, because the way I was picking it apart was based on the rubric, looking for responses. And I did not score them very strongly in any category, but for the second one of a proven track record of working with school districts with diverse populations and anti-racist communities. My comment at the end the note that I wrote to myself was, I know this firm brought Javier to Portland, but honestly, based on this proposal, it seems a happy accident that they pulled that search off. That was my feeling based on reading through their material. That's just me being honest and frank. And I, like Emily, sat through the public processes and met Javier and the woman that ultimately didn't get hired, and thought they were both exceptional candidates. But I still, again, after reading their proposal, said, well, okay, it was a happy accident they found two qualified candidates. And then I guess the other thing I just want to bring up, just to Emily's point, because I agree that the revolving door syndrome in Portland is a frustrating one. And Javier brought some stability to that, which was great. But I don't know that I want to account that to a search firm, because there's no guarantee that a search firm is going to, they can't guarantee somebody's going to last a year. They can guarantee to redo a search for free if that person doesn't last a year. But I feel personally that Portland's come a long way in keeping people here. When Manny left, he left for a larger opportunity, whereas Javier came here because he was looking for something to end a career with. And to me, that's what I want to find in a candidate. That's somebody that's not ladder climbing, but is actually feeling like we need to find a place of stability, and Portland could be that place. But that's
Anybody else want to speak to BWP before we?
I can. Can I?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Yes, for me, I was not really impressed that much. First of all, because I don't feel like, because they have done a couple of years ago, and we got Javier, then I have to have them come back again, because I think it's about the person, it's about the candidate, it's about the value of the candidate, it's not about the firm. So I feel like I can give another firm a chance, to bring more values, because I feel like my first impression when I was reading them is like, okay, I know Portland, and I know what's the Portland Public School looking for. So I feel like it's too much comfortable, and then I was not really open up to grade them, more than my first choice.
Thanks, Mickey. Oh, I'm sorry, Joseph, anything you'd like to add, just to keep bias for who's in the room and who's on video, make sure everybody gets a chance.
No, that was actually a great counterpoint. That's fabulous, actually.
Great, thanks, Joseph. Go ahead, Lucy.
It really rubbed me the wrong way that they go on about how they can translate stakeholder surveys into languages other than English and Spanish, but it's $250 extra per language. Most of the students at Portland Adult Ed are English language learners. And, most of them also, have children in the school system, and it doesn't feel right to turn their inclusion into like an optional extra. That really rubbed me the wrong way about them.
Right on. Okay, so please, Alyssa.
I did want to say in their favor, I didn't score them very high based on the rubric, but I thought their presentation of the information was extremely clear, and that there's like a very helpful level of complexity to what they present, and also detail. And so I really appreciated just how clear they were about the process and about their definitions of things, and kind of moving forward. So
great.
Made me think things might be simple going with them.
You just blew up my comment. I was going to say, it sounds like maybe we have a good example of an halo effect in this one, but you pointed to a broader set of skills that they're bringing, so maybe that's not the whole of it. So we're going to leave them alone for a moment. We're going to flip over to Human Capital Enterprises, which was the second highest score. Again, just anybody, it was clear that we need at least 2 interviews, and I think we're going to talk about a third, but is anybody not okay with moving Human Capital Enterprises forward to an interview? You're not okay.
Is the question
Great.
okay with not okay?
Not okay. Looking for, great. Okay, so we need to have a more substantial conversation. We're at 7:31, so I need to check with folks about your time, because we're probably have at least another 20 minutes of conversation to get down to 2 to 3 organizations to interview at this point. So is anybody not okay for time?
I have to pick up a kid during high school at 8, so I'm gonna leave 15 minutes.
Okay. Okay. we'll do what we can. So let's do the same thing with human capital enterprises. First of all, sorry, before I do that, nobody else has we all have time constraints. We have other things to do, but everybody else has 15 minutes to keep going. Yeah, okay. So human capital, anybody like to champion them first? Yeah.
I just like their explicit pointing out of injustices and like the explicitness of that. Not a lot of them went into detail in this form, so I appreciated that, and I felt like that it just kind of made me feel like they had a different sense of understanding about equity than all of the other folks, because they named some things that I didn't even see in any of the other applications.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I thought it's sort of the anti-racist equity focus there that we didn't see in some of the other ones. I noted that they seemed skilled and experienced. They had BIPOC representation, though no females on the team. Even though some of the folks were new-ish, that they had done the work for a long time, a pretty detailed work plan. They had a lot of detailed cost information.
Were these the folks that were human resource?
Yeah, they're spin-off of HYA.
Yeah, like
As in someone jumped ship from HYA to found this firm.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't.
Broke off and started his own.
So many interesting things, but I just think it's like if our whole rubric is about equity, and they're literally the only people that explicitly name like paragraphs of our leader understanding the moral responsibility to like dismantle that is just like, I feel like if the whole rubric is about equity and maybe, yeah, I don't know. I just felt like
It's so
they're
interesting.
the only ones that like were even only specific about that, to the detail of like, we're gonna try to ensure that our leader understands the moral responsibility to dismantle like racial structures. And
I did think that was good, like kind of at the top of the proposal. They didn't provide much specificity kind of like going forward after that. I thought I didn't love, and this isn't like, a total deal breaker. They use the term transgendered on page 26, which kind of makes me like, oh, hey, we're not totally as with it as we may be saying that we are. But like I said, that, one word compared to everything else that they're saying is not everything. But it did sort of make me kind of cast the doubt.
It's interesting. I wrote in my comments that equity is in there, but tokenized, because it felt like it was performative up front and not at all incorporated into actually the work that they were proposing to do. I noted, as Barb did, that it's an all-male team. And I thought that they're heavily focused on Washington and Oregon. Just the logistics of that seem pretty challenging. I understand some of the other firms are in Illinois, but Illinois is half as far as in Oregon. And could I just finish? Sure. And then, lastly, that the sample leadership profile that was in the proposal, I don't think is what we need. I found those kind of rambling and all over the place and not focused and useful. So it was interesting to me that they included a sample, because I was like, oh, that's not what we need.
I just would echo all of those thoughts. They were the same that I had written down.
Some of my notes were kind of also along that line. It's their notes on equity, their comments about equity and inclusion did seem a little superficial.
Right now, Mickey and Joseph, anything you'd like to say about this group, the Human Capital Enterprises?
Yeah, I just echo a little bit what Sarah just mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah. I also wanted to mention, not about their application, but I wanted to talk about how like for like the rest of the groups and when we talk about equity and when we think about equity, I think Emily mentioned the word token, and I think that it's better for us to look at the ways in which they will implement the ways in which they will help us implement equity, right? Or how they're gonna go about it than the words that they're using. Because I've read through most of the applications, right? And it was like similar, tokenized wording and stuff like that. There were a couple of firms that actually spelled out what they were gonna do, how they were gonna do it, what processes do they use, access networks they have and stuff like that. And so I think that like in the future, even like when we're doing interviews and stuff like that, more so than just coming to me and tell me that you're all for Black folk, I need to see what are you going to do about it? What are the steps that you're using? What are the networks that you have and stuff like that? But
I just want to say something. I think it's important. I understand what tokenizing is, but I think it's important to understand that racial equity is a complex. And if you understand the wording, you understand the phrasing, you understand the processing, you don't get there by just tokenizing through that whole thing, or like you don't get there by not having the education and the resources to talk about injustices and how they've been specific to this role. That's what equity is. If we don't have a superintendent that understands systematic racism, that can name like that certain of those characteristics are intentional and they're going to structurally be intentional at your school, and you have to figure out and understand how to dissect those. I think like if you can name it, then you understand what it is. If you like, there are ways to tokenize and there are ways to specify, but a lot of tokenism doesn't actually name the problem. And that's what my problem was with the other ones. I would say the other ones are tokenizing because they're not naming it. They're just saying like, we're going to include equity in our process, which is great. And I think that's more of, or I don't know, for me, I feel like that's more of the tokenism because it's what we want. We want you to obviously include it, but I want it to be named. If you can't name and specify the actual, and I guess can go back to what I was talking about, implicit bias and bias. If you don't name what is harmful versus what is just a regular feeling, then you're not going to know the difference, right? Like if you don't name what is intentional or what is an unconsciously intentionally racist versus something that is a dislike or a culture or like a cultural disbelief or a regular stereotype, then you won't understand like what is the difference? Is it systematic or is it just a cultural thing that we have that is indifferent, right? And so I don't know. I just kind of felt triggered by like everybody saying it's tokenizing, it's tokenizing. I think when you don't know what is tokenizing until you get to that point of having that conversation. But I feel like there's something to be said about somebody naming the issue versus like going around it and trying to, because like we also all don't know how they're going to work this process. We're not going to be there with them to indicate that like, yes, you're implementing equity in this process, but I just want us to like understand that naming is a big thing because we don't get access to actually naming the harm that we're experiencing, that we're feeling. But yeah, I just felt like I needed to say that, and I appreciate the conversation, but I think like, let's also be sensitive and not try to talk in a way where it's like, I don't know, putting down another concept or point or idea. I just want to, I felt indifferent about that, I guess. That's just the point I wanted to raise. Thanks.
Well, I'm open to interviewing them.
Well, yeah, so we have one firm confirmed we've moved to an interview, which is Alma. We have 3, and I think we have to reduce that to 2. So I don't have clarity based on like my internal reflection of our conversations, other than I think my sense is that HYA seems perhaps the weakest in terms of its support based on the conversation that we've had. So I guess I would put them up first as like to remove them and then move forward with the other two and see if, I mean,
Oh, I see what
well,
you're-
yeah,
I see what you're-
ultimate three, but yeah, perhaps we don't need to discuss the three remaining. So I don't know.
BWP was also low too.
It was also low, but in terms of the conversation, and again, my own bias could play here, that you and Matthew were the two that supported HYA the strongest, and then there was not other resounding support for them, where BWP, there was more, if I just was kind of like counting who was supporting in their comments, there was more, so that's why I was starting there. Yeah.
Can I say one last thing about what I'm saying here? Because I've been trying to avoid speaking, but I have to say that I agree completely with you on what you were saying as far as human capital enterprises, because I can tell you, I read that, and to me, I appreciated that they were like, boom, they just called it right out. It wasn't, all this, like I felt like the other ones were more like they didn't have that nerve or that courage to just say it, so I really appreciated that about them, that they did have that. So I just want to say, like, I agree. I get what she's saying. I totally get it. So
yeah.
As do I. I guess my concern was just, yes, they're naming it. In what are they doing about it? Was kind of the question mark for me.
Which is great that we have an interview opportunity to press into that with them and any other firm. But to your point, it sounds like HYA or BWP it's one or the other perhaps, or not. I don't know. I'm a little lost. So if somebody feels like they have clarity on how to get to three right now in 2 minutes, I'm here for it.
Because I think that you just made the case that we could drop HYA.
Yes,
But
I
I
did.
don't think
But
it was agreed upon.
it's not unanimous at the, which is why it's not easy to just say that's what's happening.
Okay.
So we could do quick votes or something else.
Well, I guess I would ask, did the comments that you heard about BWP change any opinions? Because I think you took that vote first and then heard people's comments, and did those comments change anyone's opinion?
There you go.
I do think we have a little bit of the halo effect going on with them. I do. Because I will tell you, I'm going to own it. Like when I was reading on them, I was like, oh my gosh, they hired Javier. It's got to be great. I mean, that was the first thing that went into my head when I read it. But again, there is something to be said about that, but I do think that is something that is going on there.
They were pretty low for me. I felt like they were like big firm. I don't know. They just kind of repped big firm for me. Like that's just what, like even the way I really liked it, but the way they described their acclimates, I was just like, oh my God, I feel like that's like a corporate way of like talking about. So I felt like it just gave me that sense of like big corporate, not really personal. But I think your comments definitely swayed towards not really, not looking at them as somebody that have done something good for us, but like, is it something that they can do again with kind of like the different frames and the different areas that they're working in?
Adam,
yes.
Could I interrupt this process for a second? Because I
Yes.
need to leave, but just to talk about the interview process.
Yes.
So if it does seem like we're going to interview 3 firms, which means we're going to need a second time. So we'll work on scheduling. I just want to say scheduling is imperfect. There is no time when we're all available. So we're just going to have to do what works for the most people. And I apologize because I know missing any of these meetings is not anything any of us want to have to place we want to be in. So there's a meeting on everyone's schedule for November 21st, starting at 5 p.m.
Yep.
That is intended to be a 3-hour meeting. So in that meeting, we would interview 2
Don't you think? I don't think you can do 3 in 3 hours.
No, we can't do 3 and 3 hours. I was assuming we're gonna do, can you just hold, because I need to leave and I just wanna, you guys can talk as after. But my initial thought was we'd do 2 firms and then and then make our decision, have our evaluation conversation right after. The scheduling is a little tricky, so maybe ideally we could do 2 back-to-back days and then have the scheduling conversation. So I think we'll have to go back and then do another doodle poll and also see about the firm's availabilities. So we'll work on scheduling. Our thought is that we'll do 50-minute and up to 50-minute interviews all on Zoom. Since they're going to be on Zoom, we'll all be on Zoom. That there'll be a lead facilitator, which would be either Adam and myself as a co-chairs of this committee, that we'd have pre-planned questions and assigned questions, so you know exactly who's going to ask what question. And there'd be no on-the-spot new questions, but you could do some follow-up to get additional clarity. And then an opportunity, of course, for the search firm to ask us questions. We want to have an evaluation rubric, and I'm wondering if a small group of us could build off of the rubric we use to evaluate the proposals to come up with an evaluation rubric. Are there any volunteers for that?
Lance.
I love the rubric.
And Alyssa, Matthew. So I heard it.
Barb, too.
Oh, yeah.
Barb, Sarah, Matthew, and Alyssa, and yourself.
Okay, great. Then we need to have interview questions. So far I have brainstormed some interview questions and gotten some feedback from Barb. So there's a starting place, but it was just intended if we could possibly do that all in this meeting. I wanted to have a starting place to give everyone. So I guess, is there another group that's interested in looking at and working on the interview questions?
Could we just have access to like go in and out whenever we want to?
Yeah. So how about that? So maybe for the rubric, the interview questions, I think we have a pretty good starting place. Totally happy. You know, they'll need more. They need to be worked on. But I'll email those all around for everyone to give feedback. And then I think the group work is really around the rubric. Okay.
And Emily, I'll be a co-editor just to tighten up the questions with you perhaps before we're live.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Thank you, everyone. If you want this information, I wrote it out. And so I'll just hand it out to you.
While you do that, perhaps, I think I have a proposal to get us through this gridlock. If everybody considers they have one veto, think about who you would give that veto to, and we'll just do a quick round across the 3 firms, and whichever firm gets the most vetoes does not advance. So
of the 4.
Of 3.
Of the 4 remaining.
BWP, HYA, and HC are human capital. Because all
those 3.
Because all of we already unanimously said in this advance.
Wait, what?
So BWP, HYA, and Human Capital Enterprises. There's no unanimous feel on the
Yeah, that I got.
So I'm saying you get one veto,
Veto for
meaning that firm would not advance.
Okay.
To get us from 4 to 3.
To get us down one. So whichever firm the most people say they would not advance, would not advance. Does that make enough sense to folks to utilize as a method?
That's a good idea.
Matthew, I'm looking at you as somebody that would critique that.
No,
Okay.
It's essentially of the remaining 3 firms, the firm with the most no votes doesn't go forward.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just, I'm
fine with the process.
I'm just a little slow, you understand?
Oh, yeah, it's all good. It's all good. I'm moving real fast at this point too, so.
Yeah, well, I also have something that I need to address before the end of the meeting. So
Okay,
carry on.
so think about BWP, HYA, and Human Capital Enterprises, and which one you would not advance to an interview.
I would not advance HYA.
Okay,
And we're not editorializing, we're just telling you.
just tell me.
I would not advance BWP.
Okay, Sarah? If you're prepared, or we can come back.
I'm sorry.
HYA.
Okay, Barb?
HYA.
Okay,
BPW.
Okay,
DPW.
okay,
Getting really interesting now. Emily would not advance HYA.
right. Oh, that's what she just said. Matthew?
DPW.
It's gonna be.
Pete and Joseph, thank you. Who would you not move forward? BWP, HYA, or human capital?
BWP.
BWP and Joseph? I can't see your chat. It's too small.
You have,
Oh my gosh, no, you gotta vote.
Oh, no, you gotta vote. You can't abstain.
No.
Eeny, meeny, miny, moe, right?
Yo, this is crazy tough. Oh,
The pressure. I could also change my vote because I also don't love BWP because of their disrespect to speakers of other languages.
I'm curious to know what Joseph thinks.
That's common across a whole bunch of these, so that was not just them.
Yeah.
But are the,
Joseph.
Joseph.
I'll just leave it.
Can I abstain? Also,
No, like.
Oh, abstain. Oh, yeah, no, please don't.
Yeah,
It would be really helpful if you did not.
just choose one. If you don't like, well,
I'm gonna go with the majority on this one.
Which is.
Which one do you think the majority is?
Didn't you speak for BWP about the training?
Yeah.
Their like mentorship? Yeah, you advocated for that. So would you agree?
Yeah, I will jump with this sinking ship.
Wait, what? Wait, so what's it called?
The sinking ship.
Jumping off the sinking ship.
So you would not advance
Yeah,
HWA?
I wouldn't advance BWP. What I'm trying to say.
Oh, so you're changing your feelings.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, so that makes it that BWP would not advance.
Okay.
By
So it'd be-
very close vote.
Alma, human capital, and HYA.
Yes,
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood.
absolutely.
Wow.
Woo! That was a
Interesting.
Crazy.
lot more heat than that than I was expecting coming
That
in.
was actually good. It was a good amount of fiction, I felt like.
Yeah, there you go, there you go.
Like,
Just read the line.
enough to not, all of us to not have the same mindset.
So thank you all for going the distance tonight. Emily's left these materials about next steps. We'll look into the scheduling of another session for interviews and debriefing. And
Lucy had
Yeah.
I do have something that I'd like to address. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to be here last week. But the meeting was scheduled during a time, not just when I had a conflict, but when I'm actively teaching at Portland Adult Ed,
Yeah.
which represents over 2,000 students, within the district who have, many of whom have children within the school system. So they have a real vested interest in what's going on. And, it's very frustrating to have this meeting scheduled during the one time that's my only conflict is my class, non-negotiable conflict is my class when I am teaching and I cannot be at the meeting. And to schedule now the interviews on a Monday and Wednesday evening, you're basically asking me to be a part of the process and represent my 2,000 students who, aren't electorally represented, many of them, because they're not citizens and can't vote. You're asking me to give up my salary in order to represent them. And I don't mind telling you the other shortlisted colleague from Portland Adult Ed, who will probably replace me if I have to drop off the committee. She's quite conservative. And we've had a conflict in the past over equity and police presence at PAE. So I just would like to draw attention to that. I cannot attend meetings that are on Monday and Wednesday evenings, at least through December.
Right.
And I know that's an inconvenience in scheduling, and I won't be able to attend every meeting, but for a really important meeting, such as when we're interviewing search firms, I would really appreciate the consideration in scheduling.
Yeah. Heard. And I'd have to look back at the doodle, but I believe that Monday that we scheduled, it was everybody else was available that evening except for you, and that wasn't true for other instances. So, from that perspective, was the least worst of bad choices, you know, in terms of somebody not being able to attend. But I've heard you since the last meeting you had missed because of conflict, and I don't want that to be a pattern. So I'm just commit to you that we'll look at the availabilities with that in mind.
Thank you.
Of course. Anything else that anybody would like to voice before we close tonight?
Thanks for doing such a nice job. So
No,
Yes.
That was a big body of work that we did push through.
Okay, well, thank you all for your grace. Good night on Zoom there. Thanks for the.
Thank you. Great job. Thank you, Adam.